Welcome to the comfy zone. Make yourself at home.
When I was growing up in my parents' house with my little brother, there was never a time that we didn't have pets. There were always dogs in the house. Boxers, Irish setters, German shepherds, you name it, we had one. We also had cats, Siamese, Persian, Himalayan. But for a short time, my favorite was a goldfish I bought with my own money when I was 14. I had saved up money from Christmas and birthday cards so that I could buy a small tank with a filter and have a pet that was really just for me. I was excited to go shopping for a goldfish, and when I picked a goldfish at the store, I even gave him a name before the employee even scooped him out of the tank. Because he was shaped a little bit differently than the other fish, and he had an unusually large white head with prominent black eyes, I named him Eyes. I bought all the supplies for Eyes and put them into his new home. As soon as I got home, I set everything up on the kitchen table while my family ate dinner. My family is usually pretty talkative during dinner, but that night my mom was unusually quiet. At first, I thought maybe someone was sick or something. Maybe my grandmother had fallen down or something. In the back of my mind, though, I knew something else was wrong, because no one said anything about my mom's odd behavior. The family conversation went on like normal while Mom sat at the table staring at the aquarium. She looked like she was crying, but her face was dry. Her hands shook whenever she picked up a piece of food and turned it over in her hand. The way she stared at the goldfish while making these strange repetitive motions made it seem like she was on autopilot. After dinner, when my mother went to make sandwiches for lunch the next day, I followed behind her. She was still staring at the aquarium as she took out the bread from the pantry. I stood silently by the counter, watching until my mom finally spoke. "You know, I've been thinking," she said. "Maybe we shouldn't get any more pets." I asked her what was wrong, and she told me we just had too many animals in the house. My dad must have been just as confused as I was, because he intervened and pointed out how I had been saving up for a while and showed a lot of responsibility. She gave in, and I ended up moving Eyes into my room. It wasn't long after that I noticed my mom continued acting strangely around the aquarium. She didn't watch Eyes anymore. Instead, she focused her attention on whatever else she could focus on in the room, as long as she didn't look at the goldfish. Then one day, when I came home from school, my mom was sitting alone in the living room, staring at the aquarium. I asked why she had moved Eyes into the living room, and she said it was easier to see him there instead of my bedroom. I agreed with her and sat next to her. She leaned against my shoulder and rested her head on my chest. She told me not to worry. I was totally caught off guard, because even just the day before, she seemed to go out of her way to avoid looking at my goldfish. And now she wanted it in the living room for everyone to see? It was almost as if she felt guilty about something. Later that evening, when my dad got home from work, my mother told him the same thing she'd told me earlier. She just wanted the whole family to be able to see the aquarium. For the next few days, my mom's behavior became more and more strange. She would sit in front of the aquarium and stare at it for hours. When she wasn't doing that, she was cleaning it obsessively. One morning, I woke up early and found her kneeling next to the aquarium holding the hose. I asked her what she was doing, and she told me she was washing his fins. I tried to ask her where she learned about cleaning fish, but she wouldn't answer me. All she said was, "Just trust me." One afternoon, I came home from school and went right to the living room to find my mom sitting in the corner of the couch, staring at the aquarium. When I asked her if she was okay, she told me that she was fine. Before I could talk further, she told me to come to her. When I did, she led me to the bathroom. She pointed out the toilet and told me to sit on top of it. When I asked her what I was supposed to do, she pulled open the lid. The water was cloudy, with something floating inside. She reached inside and picked up a small eyeball. She had it in her palm for a moment, closed her eyes, and then threw it into the toilet. She told me I should never be afraid of death, and she turned away and left the bathroom without saying another word. I cautiously walked back into the living room, expecting to find the aquarium empty, like what my mom just did was a sick way to explain that my goldfish died. But to my surprise, my goldfish was perfectly fine swimming around the tank. Because he was such a unique goldfish, there was no way that this was just a replacement to cover up the death of my goldfish. I just couldn't understand what had just happened in the bathroom. My mom had her hands and face pressed up against the aquarium. Her forehead was pressed into the glass like a child seeing their first dolphin show in the splash zone. I had never seen her smile that way. Her mouth hung open, and her eyes frantically followed my goldfish every time he would even move slightly. Once in a while, the movement would stop for a second, and she would lean forward and press her nose harder against the glass, and then eyes would swim again. She sat there in silence for what seemed like forever, until she finally let out a small laugh. She looked over at me and smiled, telling me she was sorry she hadn't told me sooner, but it was such a joy watching eyes swim. I asked her what was so funny, and she told me that she had just realized that she was finally happy. She coughed like she was trying to clear her throat, and for a second it looked like she had spit something out, but quickly wiped her mouth. I asked her if she was all right and whether she needed to lie down, but she quickly wiped her mouth again and said she was fine, before returning to being pressed up against the aquarium. I noticed when she went back to the aquarium that she seemed to have been trying to hide something. I put my right arm around her shoulder and did my best to hide the fact that I was trying to see what she might have been hiding. I could only see it for a moment before she had seen my reflection in the aquarium glass and violently pushed away what she was hiding, and it was no longer in my line of sight. Then she returned to the aquarium again and continued staring in silence, as though nothing had happened. I sat in shock, replaying the previous moment in my head. What I had seen was repulsive. My mom had coughed up several small fish bones and 3 or 4 small black fish eyes and was trying to hide them from me. I didn't know whether she was eating small fish or how she was getting these parts, but the thought made me sick. I looked into the aquarium and saw the goldfish was directly in front of my mom's face. She stared at him like an idol. He seemed to stare back like the two were stuck in time. This went on for at least a minute before Eyes opened his mouth, and he spit out what seemed like a small black fisheye. I had no idea whether this was where my mom had gotten what she had coughed up, and I didn't have much time to figure it out before my dad and little brother walked through the front door. "Hey guys, what's up?" my dad asked. My mom stood up, wiped her hands on the front of her long blue skirt, and walked over to hug my dad. I couldn't believe how quickly her strange behavior changed, as though someone had flipped a switch in her head. I heard the quick pounding steps of my little brother going upstairs to his room, and I turned to look into the aquarium. The goldfish swam around like he usually did, and I saw him swallow something that had been floating in the water. I assumed it was whatever he coughed up before my dad and brother walked in. That night, I decided to move the aquarium back into my room, though having it in my room made me feel incredibly uneasy. When my mom and dad asked why I decided to move it back, I tried to play it off by saying I would feel more relaxed with the aquarium in my room, but the truth was that I wanted to keep Eyes as far away from my mom as possible. That explanation seemed to be sufficient, because my mom didn't bring it up again, and even put out a few picture frames and some candles on the small table the aquarium had been on in the living room. It was as though she went from being completely obsessed to disinterested overnight. My mom's behavior returned to normal, but the image of her face pressed up against the glass stuck with me. Still, I always wondered whether Eyes was the cause of this strange behavior, rather than some issue my mom was dealing with out of nowhere. Even so, I was always cautious to keep my bedroom door closed, and I avoided having company in my room as much as I could. I'm sure my parents thought it was just me being a teenager and needing my space, but the hidden reason haunted me until I finally moved out of my parents' house into my first apartment. It was then that I decided to put up an ad online offering to rehome my goldfish and include the whole aquarium setup. First come, first serve. The next day, I was helping the new owner carry the tank to his truck, and as I watched the truck turn out of my apartment complex, I felt unburdened and clean. never having to see the aquarium and relive that moment again. I considered getting a cat to keep me company, but I chose to enjoy my new freedom without having to worry about the challenge of being a pet owner. My parents still come to visit me and drop off the occasional care package, just to make sure that I'm taking care of myself while I'm in school, so it's not like I'm desperate for company. There is still one thing that makes me feel uneasy when they come to visit. Every so often, my mom will ask if I ever plan on getting another aquarium, and I always decline. But every time, she seems disappointed and says the same thing. That's too bad. I always loved eyes.